Well, after completing Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of Poppy Playtime, there was no doubt I was going to do a review of Chapter 3, and I have already finished the game. I've already earned the Platinum Trophy twice for the PS4 and PS5 version, so there is my little bit of basically just showing my gaming credentials right here and now. That being said, easily worth mentioning that the hardest trophies in the game are Self-Restraint and Poppy's Angel. Poppy's Angel obviously beating the game without dying, and secondly being Self-Restraint, which is basically not limiting your ability to use the main game's mechanics. So you have very little room for error when it comes to solving puzzles and completing fights, and basically encouraged at times to try and manipulate the game to your advantage as best as possible. Of course, this game does require a bare minimum of 2 playthroughs and sometimes 3 depending on how you really screw things up as far as the collectibles go. So let's talk about it. So, Chapter 3, Deep Sleep, is interesting compared to Chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 1 and 2 were fine, okay games. Chapter 1's biggest weakness was that it was way too short and didn't make much use of the game's grabbing mechanics. Chapter 2 does improve on that by giving us more regarding the mechanics with the arms, being able to swing around and do other cool bits and pieces, while adding more potential failure points and making the game slightly longer. Now, Chapter 3 does a very similar thing, where the jump from 1 to 2 is similar to the jump between Chapters 2 and 3. Where the game is longer than Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 put together, mind you. There are more mechanics added on, so rather than just having 2 hands, you've got more hands that you will earn throughout the game and be able to use even more beyond that point, including one that's kind of like a gun almost. And in addition to the addition of like extra puzzles, little bits and pieces that we like to see here, it's worth mentioning that the ending, rather than it just being a single chase against the big bad guy, it's in fact got an actual boss fight with mechanics and stuff, which was actually quite a bit of a surprise. And also, the game does touch on some much darker elements, I want to say. And that's specifically in relation to a character called Dog Day, but I'm not going to get into too many details regarding the story. I do like the story a lot more here than I did in Chapters 1 and 2, because Chapter 1A didn't have much of a story, and Chapter 2 was just kind of basically, do you want to play a game and not being presented in a particularly good manner either way. Here we get a bit more of a story, but I haven't been paying that much attention to it, to be completely honest. I was just kind of running through it. So mechanically, already the game is much better than Chapter 1 and 2. There is more of a prevalent story than in Chapter 1 and 2. And another thing worth pointing out is that there are a lot more puzzles than Chapters 1 and 2. Now, the most important thing to keep in mind is that my complaints for Chapters 1 and 2 still very much exist in Chapter 3, which is that there's way too many puzzles and not enough story. I feel like eventually you kind of need to focus a little bit more on the story rather than all of these, puzzles that the game is just constantly throwing at us. Because some of the puzzles can, like I said, be incredibly obtuse, and at times you just kind of don't know what you're doing until you really start to mess around with the game and eventually kind of figure things out. But what makes things even worse for Chapter 3 is that the chase sequences in the game have puzzles themselves that you need to figure out. So not only do you have puzzles that you need to solve, but you also need to solve them within a limited period of time, and more often than not, you're not going to figure it out until you've been jump scared 10 or 15 times and then realize, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. But then once you understand the logistics around how some of the puzzles work, basically you'll understand the entire game. And the most predominant thing about trying to figure out how to move forward is always to look up. I think that's probably the most important thing when it comes to this type of game, is if you ever find yourself in a room and you don't know what you're doing, most likely you just need to look up and you'll find your solution right then and there. So how do I feel about this game overall? I still don't like it. despite the small things that I do like, for example, the character Dog Day and Kissy Missy, outside of these two particular characters, there isn't really much that I really like. Because again, there are way too many puzzles. They have very obtuse sections. The story should have been, or rather the game should have been more story focused rather than puzzle centric, as it ended up ultimately being. And Catnap as a villain is all well and good, introducing us more to the main villain of the entire franchise, being the prototype. While having the sort of villain is all well and good, I feel like Catnap was very much shafted for the most part as a bad guy. Though at least we do, like I said, get a boss fight in the end, rather than just a simplistic chase like we got with chapters 1 and 2. So if nothing else, there are at least some benefits to, you know, actually fighting this horrid monstrosity of a creature, and then rather than just like running away from something. So for all of the good that the game does, the game's still relatively short. I'm not a fan of the puzzles. I feel like I'm just kind of repeating myself at this point. So at the end of the day, for all it's considered, it's probably definitely the best of the Poppy Playtime games. It's definitely better than Chapter 1. It's definitely better than Chapter 2. Despite my complaints about the game. And honestly, if I were to give Poppy's Playtime Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 out of 10 score, both of those would be a 5 out of 10 for different reasons. But definitely, overall, I feel like it will be a 5 out of 10. This game is definitely a 6 out of 10 in my opinion. I think that it is much better, much stronger, but there's some things in this game, like the writing, for example. So if I were to give just an example of my favorite part of the game, and then my least favorite bit of writing in the entire game, you meet a character called Dog Day at the end of the Playhouse section, and the way in which they treat him, I absolutely loved. I loved what they did, and they really gave us some treat regarding the sort of sense of body horror that they basically show in reflection to Dog Day, and also how you could theorize about how Dog Day is feeling, being forced to move around and function despite, you know, the bottom half is his body basically being cut in half, and the body, you know, bottom half just completely missing, you know, stuff like that. But when it comes to basically he'll chase you down, but at the end of the chase, when you come back to this main area here, being this playroom, a little boy called Ollie, or a voice of a little boy called Ollie, you know, calls you over the phone, and immediately then says, "No ouchies, no lost body parts," in the voice of a little kid. And when I heard that, those two lines put together really ruined what Dog Day brought to the table with the body horror and everything else in between. I was just like, that shift was just way too janky, so I really wasn't a fan of that. But those are kind of my thoughts on the game, and a very, very specific example of like how I think the duality of this game is, hey, when it does something good, I'm sure there's going to be something else to complain about that you're probably not going to like. But with all of that being said though, let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. I'm aiming for 500 subs by the end of the year. And with all that being said, I do upload every day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.